Hello everyone, so just another check-in here with me in this vlog. So I am about 187 pages into the Beekeeper of Aleppo, so I thought I would do a quick check-in. I am really enjoying this book so far. So this follows Nuri and Afra. So Nuri is a beekeeper that lives in Aleppo, and his wife Afra is an artist, and then things start to go wrong in Aleppo in Syria where they live. There's unrest and they have to leave the country, and they lose their son and they get split up from their family, and they begin the journey to leave Syria and to eventually get to the UK where they want to reunite with their family members. At this point in the book we realise that Afra has lost her sight, and we know tentatively that it's... Sorry, one of my hairs managed to actually get stuck in the book. We know that Afra loses her sight, but we don't know yet why. And we get some really interesting media through this. So we get brief emails between Nuri and his cousin Mustafa. And we're going back and forth in time between the seaside resort where he's staying in the UK as a temporary refugee trying to get asylum into the UK, and then back when he was living in Syria, both before the unrest happened in Syria and then as the unrest develops. So this is such an interesting book. I've managed to fly through this yesterday, so I literally started it yesterday, and to read nearly 200 pages in one day shows how gripped I was by this book. I think it was midnight last night, I was still reading this. I was really intrigued by this. So I actually think at the moment it's sitting at a strong, solid 4.5. I think the only reason I'm not pushing to 5 yet is it hasn't given me that feeling of falling in love with the book. I think that's quite hard to describe, but I usually give a 5 to this gut reaction of being in love from pretty much the beginning, and I'm loving this book but I'm not in love with this book. The old cliches there, but that's where I'm sitting with this. But I wanted to kind of check in and do a bit of a caveat to explain that I don't think in this vlog I've explained very clearly, but I am loving and enjoying all of these books. Obviously I've had a few issues in my past ratings with the Octafinals for The Innocents by Michael Crummy, but I would probably put that at a 3-star. So it's not a bad book in my opinion, and I think I've given it a harsh rating just because I had the issue with the incest in it, which made it easy to put it at the bottom for me. So I know that already when these videos come out that people will probably enjoy it much more than me and have nicer things to say. So please don't think that I'm just dissing that book. I think a lot of people will get a lot out of it. But I also want to explain about these other 3 books because these are all such good books in this category. So it's really difficult to rate, and I'm trying to be as impartial as possible. So realistically, Girl, Woman, Other, when I read it, was a 5-star. From the first few pages I was completely hooked. So unless a single thread really blows out the water, or the second half of the Beekeeper of Aleppo, this will probably be at the 5-star number 1 spot. Then this book is probably the 4.5, the solid 4.5 at the moment. I'm just really enjoying this story and finding it really immersive. And then these 2, realistically, I know I've said at 4/4.5, but I'm really bad at judging books because it's really hard to judge a gut feeling. But I think realistically these 2 are both solid 4 stars. But I had to pick one over the other, and so in the end with these 2, this one I think is just doing a little bit more. The plot was a little bit more experimental, trying to get the 2 stories to converge. The fantasy elements will appeal to more people, and this is just a very slow-paced analysis of the relationship between Danny and Maeve and how their childhood house seems to haunt them in adult life, which I loved. I'm not saying I didn't enjoy that. This is why these are the same. I enjoyed them both as much as each other, but this prize makes us put books above one another, and I just think overall this was a little bit more than this. You know, if I have to be that nitpicky, this had more going for it. I was immersed in the plot. I think the plot was really well done, whereas this kind of relies solely on Maeve to keep it functioning. But I'm really impressed with both of these authors, and I really am encouraged now to go back to Anne Patchett's backlist. So these books are all so good. I know a lot of people have said that about all the different categories, but by the time you get into the semi-finals, they really are that good. I'm going to check in once I've finished The Beekeeper of Aleppo and started a single thread when I've got further in my reading journey. See you then. Hello everyone, so just another quick check-in. I have managed to finish The Beekeeper of Aleppo now. So I finished this morning, and I think my ratings still stand. This is going to sit at a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this story. The second half was just as strong as the first half for me, and I really liked in the second half how it explored Afra and Nuri's grief separately. So I did talk a little bit in the last clip about this story. They have unrest in Syria, civil unrest, a war breaks out, and they need to leave Syria, and they try to travel to the UK to become refugees, as Nuri's cousin Mustafa was travelling to the UK to seek asylum. They've been told that the UK is the best and safest place to live, but it's the hardest to get asylum there. So that's the goal. And at the end of the book we do, slight spoiler here, but we do get Mustafa and Nuri to reunite in the UK. But we kind of know that Nuri makes it to the UK from the beginning of the novel, because it flips back and forth in time between him living currently in a B&B in UK trying to seek asylum. So we know from the beginning that Nuri has made it to the UK, but we go back in time to the events in Syria. And what's really interesting is quite early on in the novel we know that Nuri and Afra lose a son. And the second half of the novel really deals with how each character has dealt with that separately, and they've kind of isolated themselves in their own bubble of grief, and I found that really interesting. And it talks a lot about themes of identity, and how when your home and all you've known and the identity that you've developed in your home country, once that country's taken away from you and you are asked to find a new home and a new life and a new path, how devastating that can be psychologically, as well as the physical strain of moving and upping your life from one place to another. So this was done in a beautiful and compassionate way. You can tell Christy Left-Herry mentions at the beginning and the back of the book how this was inspired by the fact that she worked at a refugee camp in Athens in Greece, and you can really see inflections in this writing of love and respect for refugees, and you read this with awe. The tenacity, the determination, the strength that these characters have, and they represent so many real life people who come from places like Syria or Afghanistan to seek asylum in the UK and other places in Europe. It's a testament to them, and it's a love letter to them, and it's just exquisitely written, and the subject matter is dealt with delicately and beautifully, and it was just a pleasure to read. It has encouraged me to do a bit more research into these asylum seeking charities and to see where I can support, because this really did affect me in a very poignant way, and it was very moving. And with everything that's happening at the moment with COVID-19 and the way that here in the UK and the US immigration laws change and they become more strict, and we have less compassion for asylum seekers, I think, than we ever have before. I think it's really important to hear their narratives and to really connect with that. So loved this. 4.5 out of 5 stars. So I'm only putting Bernardine Evaristo's book in front of this. So as it stands, it's Bernardine Evaristo's Girl, Woman, Other as 1. This is 2. The Night Tiger by Yancey Chu is 3. The Dutch House by Anne Patchett is 4, and The Innocents by Michael Crummy is 5. Now I only have a single thread by Tracy Chevalier left to read, so this is around 330 pages, so I'm going to do a big chunk of that today because I'm on the 26th of June now, 27th, 26th, and I would actually really love to get this read by early July. Then I have the whole month of July to just dedicate to a lot of reads that I want to read. I will check in with you possibly when I'm halfway through this, but more than likely it will be when I finish this and then do a wrap up of that and then my final standings, so I'll see you then. Hello everyone, so I have finally finished a single thread by Tracy Chevalier. So I took about 2 days to finish this book. So I read it quite quickly. And I was falling asleep thinking last night about what to do about this book. Because I have two conflicting parts of me about this book. Overall, I really, really enjoyed this book. And I would give it a solid 4 out of 5 stars. I think it's a really well done book. But in comparison to some of the other novels in this category, I had a few little niggles with this book. One niggle is her brother Tom. This is a really minute and nitpicky niggle, but he constantly refers to his sister as old girl every time he sees her throughout the book. And it's a little bit as if someone's just found a catchphrase that somebody in the 1930s would have said and just keeps reusing it, and it actually makes the character of Tom very one-dimensional and flat. And I found that a bit irritating because Tom's her brother and we should get a little bit more development from him, and we just don't. His wife is a lot more fleshed out than he is, and maybe it's to reflect that men kind of felt out of sorts in the 1930s and women had more of a place, and there was a lot more politics between women that men just didn't want to get involved in. Especially Tom has fought in the war and come back, and maybe he wants an easy life, but that made for very disappointing reading because there was no development of Tom, and I actually would have liked that. And second of all, another little nitpick that I had with this book is the parts where it goes into a lot of detail about the process of embroidery or bell ringing, because she meets a man named Arthur Knight, who is a bell ringer at the cathedral in Winchester. Those two sections where it went into excessive detail was great in terms of the fact that Tracy did so much research to make them genuine, but as someone who's never embroidered or rung a bell for a church or belongs to either communities, I found those bits a bit tedious because I couldn't visualise very well what was happening, and they were a bit stagnant. People who really enjoy those things will have appreciated those bits, but most of the time I didn't. But when they went into excessive detail about pulling the rope and going up the octaves and different kinds of stitching that I personally just don't understand, it kind of lost me for those pointers in the book. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. So obviously, I've previously mentioned briefly, but this is set in 1930s in Winchester. Violet Speedwell ends up moving from Southampton, from the house she lived in with her mother, to Winchester to start a new life for herself. So her mother's a bit domineering and a bit aggressive and a bit unlovable at points, and she really struggles to live with her mother, so she escapes to Winchester. She did have a fiance called Lawrence and a brother called George, and both died in World War I, and her father died of a heart attack, so she leaves her mother behind and sets off for this new life. And sporadically we hear from Tom, her brother, and Evelyn, Tom's wife, and their family. They have 2 children and eventually have a third at the end of this novel. And from there, Violet joined the embroidery group committee at the Winchester Cathedral. She then meets Arthur Knight as well, who's part of the bell ringing community, and things happen. It's a very slow paced novel, which I didn't have any particular issue with, but I can see a lot of people struggling because the ending of this book gives somewhat of a payoff for the rest of the novel, and it's kind of a bit more rushed and action-packed in the last 50 pages of the book, whereas it's very slow for the rest. So it does pay off, but I think a lot of people will potentially, if they really don't like the slow pace of this book, they might DNF it before that point. The ending was satisfying, but there's a few niggles that I had, and I don't really want to spoil. But overall, I had a lot of issues with where they took Arthur's character. I would probably discuss this in more detail at a later date or have a chat with people who've read this, but I think the way that Tracy ended Arthur's character did a bit of a disservice to the character and the representation of Arthur that I'd got for the majority of the novel. So I was a little bit disappointed, personally. But I really loved the LGBT storyline in here. So Gilda and Dorothy have a LGBT romance, which I thought was really interesting, and I think it was done in a really realistic way. It talked about how a lot of women would gossip about them, snide remarks and not understanding, and a lot of people saying it was due to all these men being lost in battle, and how these women went to extremes for companionship and all these different things. I think that would be very realistic of the gossip that would ensue in the 1930s. And it's really interesting because I've seen a lot of people talk about this book and no one ever mentioned the LGBT storyline in it. So I was really there for that, and I really loved both characters and how quirky and interesting and eccentric that they were. So I have very fond memories of this book. I have actually been thinking about it all day. But there are a few gripes, like I've mentioned, that I didn't actually have with either The Night Tiger or The Dutch House. So it is with great sadness that I've decided, although this is a 4-star, just like The Night Tiger and The Dutch House, I think this was a little bit lower purely on my own very harsh nitpicks while I was reading this book. The bits that were a bit slower, the bits that I felt I had to kind of get through, which I didn't have with the other two. There was bits that I loved even more than some parts of the other two books, but it was that peaks and troughs element of this book that I think means that, if I'm being brutally honest, it didn't make for as an enjoyable read as the other two, and I have to be fair. So my final rankings stand at number 6, The Innocents by Michael Crummy. Number 5, A Single Thread by Tracy Chevalier. Number 4, The Dutch House by Anne Patchett. Number 3, The Night Tiger by Yancy Chu. Number 2, The Beekeeper of Aleppo by Christy Lefterry. And number 1, Girl, Woman, Other by Bernadine Evaristo. So I'm quite happy with that. Like I previously mentioned in another clip in this video, they are all very, very strong books, and it's being that harsh and nitpicky to decide what your favourites were. I think every single one of them would be a deserving winner to go further, and obviously that's why they've got into this category in the first place. But when you are trying to go to the very best of the best, we do have to lose some, and I feel very affectionately towards all of these books, so it has been the hardest category to judge, to be honest with you. So I'll be happy if any get through, and I will celebrate any of these books going through, including The Innocents, because I think it does appeal to a lot of people, and maybe it was just a good book, wrong time for me. So yeah, I just had to be this nitpicky, but I would personally love if these two made it through, because they were just wonderful, and they both gave me a lot of self-reflection, and I think they're both very positive books in a world where everything's a little bit more negative at the moment. So there we go. That's my vlog of the semi-finals for Fiction Group B. There are my rankings. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon. Bye now.